All right, again, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tony Flock. I am with Creative Leadership Solutions and here today with Dr. Douglas Reeves, Lisa Almeida, and Dr. Neil Gupta, also associates of mine at CLS. So thank you again for joining us and your interest in getting PLCs right. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Douglas Reeves to kick us off and we'll hit the ground running. Doug.
Well, thanks so much, Tony. I've been a fan of PLCs, but also from a research perspective, it is one of the most important organizing principles around which any high-achieving district is based. It really forces us to focus on the four essential questions. What do we want students to learn? How do we know if they've learned it? What do we do if they don't? What do we do if they already have? And in consultation with my colleagues, we've added a fifth question: is what are we going to do about it? It's not just about student data, it's about the adult actions. So in today's conversations, I'm turning to two of my colleagues who have really had extensive field experience in coaching PLC teams, moving them from what Rick DuFour and I called PLC Lite to PLC Right. And that is an organization that has a profound and positive impact, not only on student achievement, but also, most importantly, on the adult practices. What is missing in so many professional learning community meetings is that they'll talk about the kids all day long. They'll talk about lesson planning all day long, but they don't talk about, hey, Neil, your kids did better in fractions in third grade than mine did. How did that happen? Or, hey, Tony, on that world geography test in middle school, your kids did better than mine did. We both had the same lesson plans. We both had the same curriculum and standards. Why did your kids do better? In a great professional learning community, people are always challenging each other to learn more every single day. And we have witnessed in our practice literally 39-year veteran teachers who are obliged in their pursuit of professionalism to make their conduct better and better every single day. That's what a great PLC is like. So Neil, I want to start the questioning with you. And I should just explain to our colleagues here that Dr. Gupta is not only a wonderful author, we were lucky enough to co-write an article on student engagement and leadership, but also a veteran educational leader, soon to be a superintendent in Ohio. We're very lucky to have you, Neil. Welcome.
Thank you.
So the question I want to start with is, in terms of what you and I can do as leaders, why should we make the time? In other words, when everybody's competing for time and resources, why is it that professional learning communities are worthy of our investment of time and resources?
Sure. The question kind of is definitely implied in that we don't have enough time, right? We have so many competing things going on, and we've got to really manage those resources of time and money and effort where we invest in those areas. For us, and I've worked in 3 different districts now, and I keep coming back to there is no other greater sense of what we do when we gather people together. So, we look at the Hattie research that talks about effect size, and we talk about collective efficacy. So if point 4 is the hinge point on when things matter, when there becomes significant change, collective efficacy, the idea of a group of people feeling that they are equipped and confident to know that they have the right resources and training in order to move forward, it's 1.57. So it's 4 times the impact when a group of people are together with the right resources, tools, and time being able to do that. And so the work with PLCs is the right work of making sure that, exactly to how Dr. Reeves said it, is that we kind of open our doors. We're constantly in a place where sometimes we have our doors shut. We do a great job of teaching, or maybe we're not doing it as effectively as we could. And so what matters is when we have data that comes to the table collectively that says, if somebody's doing a little bit better in an area, how else are we going to know how we can learn from each other unless we're bringing that into it? So looking at data, looking at student work, and having adult collegial conversations about how we can get better is all driven through that PLC process.
I was just with John Hattie a couple of weeks ago in Singapore. He has a sequel to Visible Learning that is out now. More than 450 million students now as part of that extraordinary database, the best in the world. And yet, what I find interesting is how robust some of those findings are. What he found 15 years ago remains the same today. There are a few core practices. And what grieves John Hattie is when people will say, well, let's take the top 10 or the top 20. No, we got to ask not only what works, because as he says, anything with the pulse works, but we have to ask what works best. And organizing ourselves as a professional learning community is one of the keys to that. But Tony, I want to ask you, there's a lot of people who label meetings professional learning community. And I've watched you transform them from simply a glorified staff meeting to a really interactive, challenging professional learning community. How do you do that?
Thank you for the kind words. I think first and foremost, Doug, you've got to remind people of why they're getting together. If we're going to have the effect size that Neil talked about, we've got to focus on the needs of the children that we're serving. And, so, at the risk of simplifying the PLC process, when I see a meeting getting off track, I'll pause and ask, hold on, time out. Can you tell me right now which kids need what? Can you tell me why? And then, as you said a moment ago, what are we going to do about it? And so getting back to the roots of that meeting, I think is the number one step to stay focused. What is it we need our kids to learn? What's the best way to teach that? How do we know, as the DuFours put, that they've learned it? But the key is remembering that our focus is about our kids, identifying their needs and what we're going to do about it. It also takes leadership courage. I'll never forget the day that a former superintendent of mine adjourned a cabinet level meeting because it had nothing to do with student achievement. Talk about setting the focus across the organization. That reminder from the leadership and from the coaches makes all the difference in the world.
Well, and Tony, one of the things that I've watched you do and all of our colleagues who coach these PLC teams, collaborative teacher teams, is when they get off track, we don't write a memo about it or write an email about it at the end of the day. We say, wait a minute, if it's not about learning, assessment, support, or enrichment, then that's a different meeting. But this meeting is just about those 4 key areas. And what you and I have also seen is some districts get rid of all the dumb paperwork and 3-page rubrics and multi-page forms to fill out to just say, how about a 4-line email? Learning, assessment, support, enrichment. So Neil, I want to turn back to you and ask the next question. And let me also invite all of our colleagues who are here on the web, please send your questions and comments to the chat room. We'd love to hear from you. And you can either send them in the chat room, or if you prefer, use the raise hand function, and you can just ask your own question because we really value your input as well. So Neil, the next question is, what do you believe is the critical first step in PLCs? What I see all the time around the country is, well, we went to the seminar and we read the book and we traveled to these various destinations to learn about it, but now we've got to do it. What's the critical first step?
Yes, I think that, and it's, first of all, it's talking about making sure, I guess it's predicated on making sure we all understand and have similar foundational knowledge of the purpose of a professional learning community. What are we really trying to accomplish? And do we all agree that this is something we want to do? Once we've done that, if that becomes the foundation, I've seen where we start jumping right into having the conversation about assessments, but before that, we starting to get into battles on assessment questions and types and things like that, when we really haven't spent enough time talking about, do we have clarity on similar learning targets? And I've seen that before, and that teams have been together for decades, and they've never had that process of sitting down and talking about what do we believe collegially. And maybe some states they've already been created for your state, or maybe you have the ability to kind of look at those things. But being able to first decide before getting into designing assessments or creating the assessments is really first sitting down and saying, what do we believe to be the essential indicators or standards for how we're going to look at what success looks like, and really going back to that. That in and of itself is a first step. I mean, as far as really moving the needle on the idea of what maybe some hidden biases are in our teaching profession. What do we believe philosophically? It manifests itself into, well, I believe this target's important, and so in my classroom we spend 6 weeks on it, or in another classroom they don't believe it's important at all and they spend it a day on it. So being able to first right size and say, first of all, what's important that we want to say that as students leave our classrooms, and they're not ours forever, they go to that next grade level, that next class, what do we believe kind of not just from a horizontal standpoint, from a vertical standpoint is going to be important.
Thanks.
And Doug, can I add on to that? because there's a piece there, Neil's absolutely right. We've got to prioritize those standards. We've got to do that pacing to make sure that we're spending an appropriate amount of time on those standards that are truly important for us. But a place where I think a really huge, it's almost like step 1A is then how are we going to measure those standards? And Neil talked about really being explicit in what we're trying to see that our kids know and can do. And this is a place where I see teams bog down so often. They either overcomplicate the assessment process, and please understand, I've got a somewhat checkered past. I've worked for 2 different educational publishers in my career at this point who made a lot of money selling assessments. We tend to, I see a lot of teachers turn to external assessments to measure their students' knowledge and skills. Those folks, good assessments give you good data, but they don't always inform what should I do right now for the kids that I'm meeting with, that I'm serving. So I think a big piece of what Neil's talking about, once we prioritize those standards, is then having that very next conversation of what's our best assessment we can use to give me meaningful evidence to infer students' knowledge and skill.
So, Tony, that's a really important point for all of our colleagues on this webinar, and that is redefining what formative assessment is. Too many vendors think assessment is anything before the end of the year. In fact, it is only formative if it informs teaching and learning. And if I can't take a look at the data and say, here's the data on Tuesday, how will I be a more effective teacher on Wednesday? It's not formative. In fact, I wrote an article called Uninformative Assessment, which describes a bunch of those. Moreover, when it comes to rubrics or success criteria, the acid test is not, is it elegant? Was it written by a Princeton doctoral candidate? Was it published by a publisher? No. The acid test is, can the students use it to make their own work better? And the gold standard for me is I can walk into a 3rd grade classroom and see a writing rubric literally taped to the desk, and I can sidle up next to the student and say, hey, how are you doing? Well, I got a 2, but here's what I need to do. If I change this word and change this transition, then I can get a 3. That's the gold standard. And way too many of these rubrics and success criteria are too complicated, designed by adults for other adults. There's one more thing, Neil, that you pointed out that I just want to pause and emphasize, and that is who our audience is. Our audience is not just parents and students. Our audience is the teacher in the next grade. When I was teaching middle school, particularly at that hinge point of grade 8, getting ready for grade 9, we grade 8 teachers beat ourselves up saying, oh my goodness, I got to get them ready for high school. And so I better do this and this and this. And I'm frantically covering everything. And maybe somebody will come along and say, well, Doug, have you asked a high school teacher? Because the real audience is saying to my high school colleagues, what do I need to do in K-8 to send students to my high school colleagues with confidence and success? And never, not once, do they say, cover every single standard. They're always focused and brief. And when you really have that vertical communication that Neil was talking about, you really break what I would call the standards paradox. In other words, there's too many of them. Everybody knows that. There's also too few. There is not a standard in any state called keep an assignment notebook. There's not a standard called ask for help before it's a crisis. There's not a standard called effective teamwork. All those things that we know are really important, but don't fall into any umbrella of state testing. So, Neil, I just really appreciate you reminding us of who our audience is. Lisa, do we have any questions in the chat room that we need to address before we proceed?
No, we do not.
Okay.
So, Doug, following up, the first question that you asked Neil is why should we invest the time in it? And he talked about the academic benefits to, the instructional benefits. I think there's a piece that we've all seen post-COVID. There's an SEL for teacher effect here. And I'm thinking about a 2nd grade team in California. One of our colleagues is working with veteran educators, 20 plus years, both of them, who really were very frustrated, had kind of, in their own words, gotten stale, in the words of their administrator, had just kind of going through the motions. Their building with coaching and support refocused the PLC process. And these veteran teachers are on fire to the point where the assistant superintendent in the district is pointing out their growth in their district benchmark assessments this year. So I think there's a piece that we can't overlook when people ask, why do we need to do PLCs, or are PLCs working? If teachers leave those meetings confident, feeling competent, with a clear plan on how they're going to address the needs of their students, then PLCs are working, and that's why we should do them.
That's a really insightful point. You can tell in about 5 minutes whether all the talk is about what's wrong with the kids or whether all the talk is about how can I improve my teaching. And only the latter is a genuine professional learning community. And I respect the fact that we need to look at data, but the bottom line is if you only talk about effects and you don't talk about causes, that is teaching and leadership, and administrators, talking about you too, it's not just about the teachers, the teaching and leadership decisions that we make, then I think we're missing the boat. We've got to talk about what we can control. There's a ton of things out there that are beyond our control, but if we focus our community meetings on what we can control, what we can influence, then we'll have a lot more of Jenny Donahue and John Hattie call collective efficacy. We'll also, frankly, have better morale of our colleagues. Well, Neil, let me turn to a different question now, and that is some of the things that PLCs don't spend time on that they probably should.
And actually, I learned a lot of this from either trial and error. Well, I can tell you, I realized this after the fact. Let me say it that way. And then I guess I got the solutions from working with you and reading some of the books that you've published that really talked about. We in my previous districts would jump right into this process. Okay, so we're supposed to have these assessments. We're supposed to look at the assessments. We're supposed to do these things. The problem for us that made us walk away from the table for a long time was that those meetings took like 3 hours. And then that's where the frustration comes in, right? People are kind of going, I don't have the time to spend 3 hours doing it. And here we didn't spend enough time at the very beginning to really set down some really strong norms. And I know that sounds awkward. We're collegial most of the time. We feel like we don't need to do that. So this feels very opposite when we kind of talk about, can't we just kind of come in and all agree we're going to do these things? Do we actually have to write these things down? Do we actually have to monitor our norms? Do we have to have them really at the top of a piece of paper and look at them? I'm going to say yes, because when we talk about the idea about inefficiency of a meeting, or the frustration that we get, and I'll explain some of those in a second, really sometimes comes down to not really clearly defining the purpose of the meeting and then holding to that. So things like being prepared before you come into the meeting. So again, meetings should take place when the data has been organized. We want to make sure we have our assessment results ready to go. What created some frustration in longer meetings was when that one person staff member comes into the room and doesn't have things organized, doesn't have the assessments graded, doesn't have them kind of in a place that is able to talk through them as quickly maybe as the others. So making sure that first norms and things like making sure we're going to come in prepared, we're going to begin and end on time, that we're going to focus on things that we can control. And so you had said this at the very beginning of the meeting, somewhere along the line, that meeting is going to slip into external factors, things we can't control. Oh, the reason why that's not going to happen is because of, family comes in, or about the older brother, right? Or about this. Those things have to be squashed right away. And interestingly, when I was talking with a group of teachers, they said, we know administrators can't be in every single room that a PLC is occurring in. So can you help to define and you're there to monitor those norms, and as not monitor, but help create them. And then we're just sticking to the agenda. Help us do that. So that way somebody's assigned in the room to be that facilitator. We talked about assigning a chief warrior. And the first time somebody used that word warrior, somebody else heard the phrase worrier, like somebody's worried about making sure that we stay on track and stay on time. And hey, I'll take either one. But we want to make sure we have that. We want to make sure we have equity of voice in the room, that we want to make sure that one person's not dominating that conversation. Here's the awkwardness. Who's going to say, okay, let's move on. You've had your airtime. Somebody else now has to come into play. So strong norms are important. And then the second was, and Dr. Reeves, you shared it, as far as having a good schedule within that 45 minutes, that block of time that says we're going to spend, the 5 minutes on some learning, some 10 minutes on the idea of what, the assessment results are telling us, then taking a look at intervention for maybe 15 minutes, what type of intervention supports and who and what needs to be put in place. And then the last 15 minutes on enrichment, focusing on that. That's that 4-line email that gets in there. We're not bogged down by creating all kinds of lists that have to come out later.
But both of you have mentioned examples of how we need to have collaboration, not just with respect to what's going to be taught, but collaboration on how we're going to assess what is taught. So we all have a consistent definition of success. And earlier I mentioned that it's not enough just to adopt the same rubric, because we've all seen rubrics that are applied in vastly different ways by teachers. But one of the things I'd like to ask you to consider, and that is to make it safe. When you are evaluating my students' work in a PLC meeting, it feels like you're evaluating me, and teachers are understandably on the defensive about that. So one thing that I've found to be really useful is get some anonymous student work. Find another school in your district, or maybe even across county lines, and say, look, I'll give you 20 pieces of 4th grade work. You give me 20 pieces. We'll take off the name, nothing that identifies the student, the teacher, the district, so that all we're going to work on in our meeting is this proficient or not? And if we disagree on that, then we'll tighten up the rubric and get better and better and better. I've seen that happen on everything from math problem solving to science lab reports to social studies essays. But when it's anonymous, it's like you can feel the tension go out of the room, because nobody feels like they are personally being attacked. Tony, one of the things I wanted to ask you is there have been instances where people just come to the meeting not prepared. How do you handle that?
I'd like to say whine and throw a temper tantrum, stomp my feet, but that doesn't work very well. I think it's polite, it's respectful, it's firmness, all of those mixed together. And so recently when a team showed up, a 2nd grade team in another district in California, without their writing samples, my reply to them was just simply, out of respect for your time, please go get those samples so that we can accomplish something today instead of just spending time with my charming company. It's consistency. It is, again, reminding that we're here to work together to accomplish what we need to accomplish for our students. And we can't do that without the evidence of the learning that we need to make those decisions. And Doug, I want to add on to your comments about the rubric. When we get that kind of teacher clarity, I witnessed a kindergarten team in Marion, Ohio, who had knockdown, drag out fights about what was proficient writing in kindergarten. But the outcome of that wasn't just a healthy academic debate. I visited the kindergarten classrooms and I had a 5-year-old grab me, hold up his paper, take me over to the rubric on the chart paper and say, this is where I am right now. Here's what I got to fix on my paper. I said, why are you talking to me? And he said, bye, ran over to his desk and fixed it. I mean, it was amazing. And when I spoke to the teacher about that, she talked about how much time she was saving in her classroom because her kids knew exactly. This was 5-year-olds. I was astounded. My idea of teaching kindergarten is like a game of whack-a-mole, and she's getting these kids to work on writing.
That's interesting, Tony, because as you know, that's some of the most robust research in not just high poverty schools, but all schools. When kids write, particularly writing to describe, to persuade, to compare, it is a dramatic improvement in reading comprehension, as well as in mathematics, science, and social studies. And we still have a pervasive misunderstanding in this country that literacy is only about reading. But in fact, if you want to really improve reading comprehension, have them write about what they've read. That ought to be a daily activity. And I'm well aware of all the stuff in the news about the science of reading. I'm not a politician. All I can say is the overwhelming, consistent evidence is reading alone is not sufficient. You got to write about what they're reading, write about what they're seeing, and so on. There's one other thing just operationally, because I suspect we've got a lot of leaders on this call, and that is back to Tony, what you said. I think you dealt with that very respectfully, and I've seen you've done that before. But here's the problem: if we don't say, "I'll wait, please take 3 minutes, go get it right now," if we don't say that, we're validating everybody else who doesn't observe the norms. And a norm is not a norm when only one person believes in it. A norm is a norm when all of us are doing the same thing. Anything in the chat room? I want to invite our colleagues to participate too.
So Doug, what I think we've been hearing from, sorry. I think it's time for our colleagues to talk to each other that have joined us. So I've got breakup rooms. That's either too much coffee or not enough. I'm not sure which, so pardon me for my lack of elegance. So ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is going to send you all to breakout rooms here, 3 or 4. The question that we'd like you to discuss, we'll give you about 6 minutes to do that and then come back to hear from you. What challenges or barriers are you encountering when it comes to improving or refining your PLCs? So again, and I'll send that out by chat to the groups. We're going to go to 4 breakout rooms, so we should be about 3 or 4 people each. The question that I'd love for you all to unmute and discuss with each other: what challenges or barriers are you encountering in refining your PLCs? Here we go. All right, Neil, you may choose. There you go. All right, as everyone is returning, thank you for your participation in the chat room. So I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but really interesting comments in our small group room, Doug, from the need to take the time, some of the frustrations that happen when you leave a place that's doing it well, but go to a place where it's not established. And Sally talked about needing to take the time to build that culture. Wendy talked about, kind of starting it by diving into the data, but not talking about instruction and hitting that piece. And then it was towards the end. Unfortunately, we were running out. But so Laura, if you'd like to add on to it, but she mentioned almost serendipitously adding a few survey questions at the end of an administrator meeting, only to discover that about 60% of her principals had never received any formal PLC training. They're so new in the process, and my immediate thought there was assumptions, and the danger of those. So Lara, what are you all planning to do as a result of that?
So we are, we've got some structures in place that I think will help us get to where we need to be faster than if we didn't have those pieces in place. But we are looking at a reboot district-wide, and we're going to start with some training for all of our site administrators this summer at our, kickoff management meeting. And I think the biggest desire is to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. And when we talk about what a PLC really looks like, that we all are imagining and picturing the same thing.
Well, please don't hesitate. If there's any resources that we can share with you, any of Doug's articles, Neil's article about engagement, just reach out to us and we'll happy to share those free of cost so you can duplicate and share with your administrators.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to jump in that
thanks, Neil.
I appreciate that you brought this up and you're talking about it. One of the things that I definitely think is, we now kind of use COVID as kind of like this seed of time and as a milestone. And we'll say things like, 5 years ago, our district did this huge PLC, kind of right before COVID, we did this PLC, and we'll just go, now that we're back to normal, we'll just pick up where we left off. You can't assume that we're picking up where we left off. You cannot do that. You're almost at a reset, and you've got new teachers that have come in. You've got some veteran teachers that maybe weren't really sure what was really supposed to be happening anyway. I think that we've all realized what we thought were our learning targets and what we thought were high quality assessments and what our kids need can't just be picked up off the shelf from 5 years ago and used today, sort of thing. So really investing that time to now my hope is you'll move a lot faster. I'm not saying, but I think that like a check for understanding sort of thing where you're looking back at all that is timely to do that. But a big misconception will be just saying, hey, we're going to just refresh, restart, and just pick up where we left off. Be careful of those phrases.
So, ladies and gentlemen, others, what comments or challenges are you experiencing or were shared by your colleagues that resonated with you?
Tony, we had the discussion about having trust, candid conversations about teaching, learning, assessment, student success, and perhaps teacher struggles. So having a culture of trust, but then also, interestingly enough, having administrators' permission to have teachers facilitate their own meetings.
Yeah.
I know you've run into that with one of our clients. Transitioning it so it's teacher owned. So.
Absolutely. Otherwise, it feels like an inquisition rather than a collaboration. And folks, I hope you understand, I am a process junkie. I am OCD when it comes to the process. And one of the things that I've learned in coaching this is that forms and templates designed with the best of intention to help people understand and make the best use of their time often become exercises in paperwork. So, if the administrator's leading this process and if we're really focused on just filling out the form, as Doug mentioned earlier, then we're not accomplishing PLCs. So taking time to build that trust, giving that teacher leadership, huge pieces. Neil, what were some of the challenges shared in your room?
Yeah, I actually want to have Dr. Reeves, if you could kind of share, to me, something that Dr. Reeves did recently in a meeting I was with, I think helped to expose some trust or elevate some trust, move trust forward was that phrase, I once thought this, but now I think. Dr. Reeves, do you want to explain that? Because I think that was it's a trust builder. You want to explain what that is?
It is, but credit where credit is due. That's what Howard Gardner and the late Dick Elmore do in their workshops. And I did a public library thing in Boston with Howard Gardner, and everybody's thinking, if Howard Gardner is willing to admit, I used to think this, and now I think that, then all the rest of us had better not have any excuses for doing that if the man himself is willing to admit what's changed. And it's a really powerful exercise because it shows, number one, that research is always evolving. And so I might have thought something, for example, learning styles theory was true 20, 30 years ago. Today, we know it's not because of wonderful research and 36 studies John Hattie and others have revealed. The interesting thing is, I'll just warn you, when you do that exercise, I used to think, and now I think, two things might happen. Number one, somebody will come up to you and say, man, thank you for your integrity. Really appreciate the fact that you're a lifelong learner and always learning new things. And the other thing that'll happen is, well, if you were wrong about that, why should we trust you today? And I mentioned my talk with John Hattie a couple of weeks ago. John said that is exactly what's happened to him. He published a new book, the sequel to Visible Learning. And instead of saying, oh, now he's got 450 million students, Hattie is the greatest researcher on the planet, which I believe that he is. Instead, they said, Hattie has changed his mind. And as if that were an indictment. That is what scientists do. If you don't change your mind, we would have never had the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, or Galileo for that matter. So all I can say is that's a long answer to your question, but I think that's a really good one to show our vulnerability as leaders. And I used to think this when I was in graduate school or when I was my first year of teaching, but I've learned a few things along the road, and that will create some space and emotional safety for your teachers to do the same thing. In my group, we had a really good comment, and I should let you speak for yourself about the impact of new teachers on professional. Would you mind elaborating on that? Because I thought you were very wise in how you expressed that.
Thank you. So yes, I'm a school principal in Texas, and I told Doug that I almost feel like I'm developing a teacher education program because we are dealing with brand new teachers coming with in those even foundational 101 teaching skills and understanding, yet alone to come to the PLC process. It's just like, I feel like there is more than that pre-work, right? That foundational work needs to get done to be able to get to PLC process and strengthen that process. It's just that, I don't know, it's teacher shortage is real. And for charters, I'm a charter school employee. Since we don't have certification requirement in Texas, mostly we are getting those teachers with no education background, brand new teachers. And as they're working with us, they're going through the certification program, they're getting their certification with us. Then once they get certified, they go to independent school districts. So it's just making sure those teachers going through the teacher prep programs, having that experience being in class during the program, and having that experience, and then they go back to their classes with their peers, they talk about those real world scenarios, right? This is what's happening, this is what the school is doing, and what will we do? What we will do to improve those practices, and how can I make sure I'm getting ready for that? Reading from textbooks is not really preparing the teachers, and that was my dissertation topic as well. It doesn't prepare them. That's one of the highest reasons that 50-60% of teachers are leaving the profession first 5 years of teaching because they're not ready for it.
We're losing so many of them, and it isn't because they're bad people. It's because they're every day. And we all can remember, by the way, what it's like to be a first-year teacher with one hand on the steering wheel as you drive home and the other hand in a box of Kleenex, trying to survive the day. And will I come back? But they need lots of support, and there are exceptions to failed undergraduate programs. Alverno College is one of my favorites, where you start your student teaching as a freshman, as a first-year student, and then a second year. And if you go into Sister Mary's office and say, I don't want to be a teacher anymore, she'll say, God bless you, my child, be an accountant, decide now. Don't wait until you're in the classroom to decide that you don't want to do this, decide it now. Unfortunately, that is the exception rather than the rule. And we have a lot of people who are kind of stuck in a major, they're not proficient yet, and they don't get the support that they need. So my appeal to all of you would be, please be a mentor to this raft of brand new teachers who are coming into our profession. They really need our support.
Yeah, Jody, Jody put a comment in the chat that she'd love to see more training for pre-service teachers during their licensure programs on how to be part of a team. What does it mean to collaborate? And I'd add to that, don't assume just because I've been teaching for 20 years that I know how to collaborate, because I may never have had a good experience with this. When I left the classroom, I didn't realize what a great team I had been a part of until, as a coach, I began to join other teams, and I realized we had the benefit. Mr. Partridge was an incredibly talented team leader who brought us together and focused us, but that wasn't present everywhere. So don't make those assumptions. Take time to build that foundation.
You know, one question that we get a lot is, what do you do when you're maybe a small school, or there's only one music teacher in the building, or one art teacher in the building, one business skills teacher in the room? When you're the only one, how do they effectively collaborate with others? And I'd be interested, Neil and Tony, in how you would answer that challenge.
So Neil, I'll go first. I want to brag about somebody just up the road from you in Lima, Ohio, folks. There's North Middle School there. There are 5-6 middle school, and they've got what they call their STEAM team. It is their PE teacher, their health teacher, their art, their music, their band teachers together. And I think several of you have talked about taking the time to build the foundation. And Julie Stewart, the principal there, was really smart in giving this team time to figure out what it was they were going to find worth their time to collaborate on. What they decided, after having read some research, was that something that would benefit all of them, regardless of discipline, was students' ability to communicate about procedures in PE, procedures in health, procedures in art. And so they wrote a paragraph about procedures, and they have hit the ground running with that. And interestingly, not only did they find something meaningful to spend their time looking at and talking with each other about, they also reported a reduction in discipline in their classrooms because kids had a better understanding of the expectations that were present. So Neil, just wanted to brag on some folks in the Buckeye State. I'm sure you've got other examples there.
No, and I think this comes to, like, there's no one right way to do it. It's just that, but it's not about, okay, well, then you go sit in your classroom by yourself. That's not the answer, So, Tony's idea of, we'll call them the encore teachers, the specials getting together and becoming a team and rallying around that common, target or centering around that. I've seen it done where others have been able to latch on to other departments, and that also has worked. It's not about good, bad. As long as that there's a seat for them and they find a place for them to feel connected. I've seen it where the music teacher is starting to pick choice selections of music based on what the English teacher, they were talking about the Renaissance period, and so the music teacher said, I'll pick some choice pieces, and why that composer was having the melody the way that they did, and kind of talked about it and seemed to kind of connect with them. I've seen it where probably, and especially due to COVID, is now we are having districts Zoom with one another, and they're doing it across buildings, either in the same district or across districts, so that they can kind of leverage that. So I think that there's lots of ways to do it. The primary thing I want to think about is don't let that be a barrier to a reason where we say, okay, you get the exception. You don't have to be you could go back to your classroom and not have to worry about what we're all trying to accomplish. Number one is we want to make sure all teachers are part of a team. It's collegial, it's collaborative, and nobody should feel left out of that process.
Yeah.
So Doug, I'm curious, Colleen interjected that she works in a large urban district with many small schools, kind of sounds like Newark where we work. And what she describes there is each building's singleton teachers meet with role-alike teachers across the district. Colleen, at the risk of putting you on the spot, would you mind unmuting? I'm curious what the successes of that have been, and also if others want to do something like that, what should they be aware of?
Sure. I think the biggest barrier was just the lack of engagement with Zoom. It is so easy to kind of check out when you're on a screen as opposed to, in person. But the biggest success of it is that, I think COVID taught us how to meet with people when we're not in person. It's why I'm enjoying all of you today, and also why our teachers from across a large district can meet with each other on a regular basis. If you weren't in a district that was large with small schools, but perhaps an overall small district, I would think that you could do this with other districts in your county or your region who have the same need.
Great point.
I really appreciate you saying that. And when you were talking, it made me think of the teacher in Lee County, Florida, who had the highest percentage of fives, the top score you can get on the AP European History exam. So I interviewed her and I said, so you're a 50% free and reduced lunch district. How are you getting all these kids getting not just college credit, but the very top score on college credit? And here's what she said. Every year, she knows that kids need to know more than the facts of the French Revolution and the 100 Years' War, the Reformation and everything else for European history. They need to know something that compels them. And so she would integrate into every year Mozart's Requiem, a very challenging piece of music. She would integrate the art that would show how corpulent and greedy Louis XIV was. And you could just see how that image would make people so angry that they would start the French Revolution. She engaged their emotions. She engaged every sense. And that's, the kids didn't change, but she changed her teaching strategies in a very compelling and evidence-based way. So I love what you said about bringing all of these other factors to bear. And there's a morale issue here also, colleagues, and that is too often, as we're coming into testing month right now in April, when this is being broadcast of 2023, you've got the tested grades and subjects and the non-tested grades and subjects. And it creates a division among our faculty. The way to heal that is to let every single faculty member know, including music and art and PE, that they're part of the team. That's one reason why the school that Tony mentioned does writing in every single topic. They're not asking, Doug, the math teacher, to be a writing whiz, because I can't do that. But they have a little tiny writing rubric about that big, and everybody does it. And it allows the entire faculty to share in the joy and the success that they achieve, and let them all know that they're part of the academic team. So for those of you who are leaders, and I know we have many leaders on this call, please think about how we can bring our faculty together, not let them during testing season be divided among one another.
And Doug, I'm going to put the spotlight on Wendy for a second, because I thought she had a really important comment in the chat regarding, if we're going to do remote meetings, use that technology. Wendy, would you mind elaborating on what you put in the chat there?
Sure. I was just pointing out, based on my experience of doing PLCs through Zoom during COVID, it's a great opportunity, but it's very easy for people to turn off the screen, and I can sit and do emails, and I'm talking to kids who are in my room doing after school tutoring. It's just so easy to not actually be present. And so it's important to maybe have there needs to be intentionality for that meeting. That kind of goes back to what you guys were saying earlier, when everyone showed up and nobody had the writing samples. Okay, well, let's go get the writing samples and let's go get busy on it. So you have to have that intentionality, but to have the norms and maybe roles so that people have an active piece that they know they need to keep track of, and to really have a strong facilitator for the meeting, just to help orchestrate all that goes on, because it's technology, and so it doesn't always go well, and then you got the people factor in there. So Zoom is great, awesome, but we do have to be very intentional about what we're doing to make sure it's successful.
Absolutely.
Such an important observation, and I would just argue the same is true for our kids. We've got a lot of students out there who, while they were out of school, kind of lost the ability to interact with one another in 3 dimensions. I thought when they were all coming back to school, oh, I'm so happy to see you. They'd sit down and they would text to the person across the table from lunch. And I think part of, for all the talk about social and emotional learning, what we have to do is really reestablish those human connections that our students need with one another, and ultimately as they leave our schools. We are rapidly running out of time. Let me give my, first of all, our participants any final thoughts, and then I'll ask Tony and Dr. Gupta to offer final thoughts. Okay, Tony, you want to begin?
Yeah, folks, I think It's never too late to say, oops, that didn't work like we intended. We've got a colleague, Dr. Costa in Bristol, Connecticut, who became famous across the state for his oops memos. You know, with the best of plans, the best of intentions, we put things in place and we think, boy, this is terrific. And it doesn't always work. You know, as Wendy talks about, and Colleen, we try to use technology and that didn't work as we intended. So maintain credibility, say, oops, that didn't work as we thought. Here's what we're going to do. So don't ignore it. Don't sweep it under the rug. Acknowledge it. And that's one way that as leaders, we earn a ton of credibility with the folks that we're trying to help.
Thank you. Neil?
Yeah, mine would be, there's a concept out there called tight and loose coupling. And I think when we started early on, I was at central office in my district, and we first came across the notion of PLCs. I sat in there and I started dictating emails of, it's going to look this way. It's going to be an hour meeting. You're going to fill out this agenda. It was 20 pages or something, Doug. I hate to admit, I probably did something like that. You're going to turn it in. You're going to do this. You're going to do this. And it was so tight. Well, it made sense to I used to be a math teacher. It made sense to a high school math teacher, possibly. And then when I pushed it out across the district, for some reason, I was getting feedback that it just didn't make sense in the elementary classroom and in the middle school classroom and an art classroom or a music department. I mean, and so you have to go back and you have to think about this concept of tight and loose coupling. And I know that you may not have read all the research around it, but intuitively, you probably understand this idea about being tight around the things that matter. Things like we're going to have norms and we're going to make sure that we're wrapped around the 4 PLC questions, but be loose around the things of, well, what if a team needs an hour and 15 minutes to do it and another team needs only 45 minutes to do it? That should be okay. Or what if that group meets on a Friday in the morning and the other group meets after school on a Tuesday? I was losing my mind early on trying to fight battles that I didn't need to fight. I was trying to keep everybody the same, which I didn't need to do. So be very clear on what are those non-negotiables and what are the things that don't matter, and be okay with those and say, as long as you get those things done, don't really care how you do the other things. So you give that flexibility for teams to be empowered, but you've got to know what those things are first that you're going to stay tight on. Make sure they're clear and they're specific, but not everything has to be tight.
Well, thanks so much to you and to all of our participants today. I'll just conclude with my own, I used to think, and now I think, when 30 years ago, we thought the way to make professional learning happen was with seminars, with keynotes, with workshops. And, I still do those keynotes all around the world. It's interesting, but that doesn't change anything. What changes things is the one-to-one or one-to-group coaching with direct and immediate feedback. And we at Creative Leadership Solutions have really changed the way that we view professional learning, because we have to be modest enough to admit what doesn't work and what does work. So it's very tempting for people who write books like I do to get all full of themselves and think, a keynote is going to have a 28-year veteran slap their forehead and say, oh, now I understand what I was doing wrong. I'll see the light. And it never happens. So I just want to encourage all of you. It's that one-to-one support, that one-to-one coaching, which is really going to help transform our schools, our teachers, and our education leaders. By the way, we always say this, Tony mentioned it earlier, we have a lot of resources that are free. Please go to creativeleadership.net. You'll see videos, you'll see tools, you'll see articles, you'll see research. They're all free. You may have been in situations where people are all cranky about copying those things. We're not that way. Research is there to be shared. So please take advantage of creativeleadership.net and let us know how we can best serve you. Thanks, everybody. For a great rest of the day. Yes, Tony?
I was just going to say, Doug, I included your email address, Neil's, and my own there. Please do not hesitate to contact us, folks. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you. As Doug mentioned, creativeleadership.net is our website. Tons of free resources, prior recordings. Thank you all so much for your participation this afternoon and your interest. Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, everybody.